on opening the sutra, the Dharma incomparably profound and infinitely subtle is rarely encountered even in millions of ages. Now we see it, hear it, receive and maintain it. May we completely realize the Tathagata's true meaning.
We're going to wait for all of the snowflakes to fall in the zendo exactly where they belong. As you know, Secho's name means snowflake, and he had a really big opening at a retreat where these words were uttered. So here comes another flake blowing in. Are we on? Cool. All right. So how magnificent that we get to practice in this snow. You know, Roshi said, I want you to make sure that you really focus on this bringing the many into the one, driving all things into the one. You know, what is the one? That's what I want people working on. And there's something about the snow just covering everything that really makes that so palpable and so real. You know, what is the one thing covering? He also wanted me to make sure that I said that to be gentle with each other because we're all sloshing around in retreat on the waves of samsara. And it's a bit of a storm. So we all have to be gentle with each other. And he said, especially remind people that, you know, your little sack of bones and flesh and mind is definitely in very close proximity to everyone else's sack of bones and flesh and mind. So just to be mindful of that. All right, well, now that we have the business out of the way, time for chaos, yes. The first chaos question is, what time is this supposed to end? Tantos? 3:40, okay, oh, that's good. All right, so even though I don't have my big black grimoire book, it wanted to take a little rest today. It was actually feeling a little shy. So it wanted me to tell you that this lecture is also written in this book, the big black grimoire. Does everyone know about the grimoire? Yes. Yeah? Did anybody not know what the grimoire is? Okay. So the grimoire of the Mumonkan, this commentary that I'm working on, Roshi asked me to go through all of the cases. And I'm calling it a grimoire because it's a book of anti-spells or anecdotes to spells. And normally grimoires are like books of spells. So each koan is this antidote to relieving the suffering of samsaric delusion and untwisting our karmic knots so that we can be free. And so that we can not be under the spell of samsaric dualistic thinking and confusion. So to do that, I cite this particular antidote, which is case 32 in the Mumonkan. And I chose Aiken Roshi's translation today because, interestingly, this is like so unexpected for me. You know, the whole Inca thing is coming like in October. And my mind wants to understand the Pacific theater in World War II. Isn't that fascinating? So that's what I've been doing. I've been watching they have those like great history classes, and this is on the Pacific theater in World War II. And I remember Dido saying that, if it wasn't for World War II, we probably wouldn't be sitting in any zendos in America because of that very close and really painful encounter between Japan and America, and the really wanting to understand what just happened there. And Aiken was actually very much in the middle of that. In fact, he was interned by the Japanese during World War II. And it happens that he was interned with this other British POW, Robert Blythe, who had been studying Japanese culture and Japanese haiku and poetry, and he was extremely well educated. And it was through conversations with Blythe that Aiken got interested in Zen. So this is kind of the web and the weave of how these things come to us. And because the Inca is really recognizing the koan tradition, the koan tradition as we have it very much is filtered through the mind of Japanese masters. Of course, it started in China, but really we're getting it very much filtered through the mind of the Japanese. So that's just sort of interesting, right? This sort of strange Indra's web and Indra's net of how we're all connected. Anyway, let's get to the case. Case 32. The Buddha responds to an outsider. The case. An outsider asked the world-honored one, I do not ask for the spoken. I do not ask for the unspoken. the world-honored one just sat still. The outsider praised him, saying, "The world-honored one, with his great compassion and mercy, has opened the clouds of my delusion and enabled me to enter the way." He then made his bows and took his leave. Ananda asked, "What did the outsider realize to make him praise you so?" The world-honored one said, "He is like the fine horse who runs even at the shadow of the whip." Mumon's verse. Walking along the edge of a sword, running along the ridge of an iceberg, no steps, no ladders, jumping from the cliff with hands open. So this is quite a rich koan, right? Let's sort of maybe set the scene a little bit more. So I suspect this might have been sort of a Dharma combat kind of situation where people were gathered around the Buddha and folks were coming up and asking the Buddha questions, and he was responding. So it wouldn't be so dissimilar to when we do like our Dharma combat. So in this case, the outsider was in the temple. So here, the outsider means anybody who's not practicing Buddhism is the outsider. So this would be somebody who knows nothing about the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, nothing really about sitting necessarily, definitely wouldn't have had to slog through the Lam Rim or any kind of Buddhist education at all. Probably would have been like maybe a philosopher, maybe a Jainist, whatever. They would have had to do their own sort of deep dive into whatever religious tradition they were in, but they didn't do a deep dive into Buddhism. So he comes before the Buddha and he says, "I don't ask for the spoken. I don't ask for the unspoken." Now this is a really deep question, right? I'm not asking you to lay down a teaching. I'm also not asking you to not teach. That's a lot of negatives in there, but if you can follow that. I'm asking for a teaching, but I've heard so many words, and I know so many things. Please help me, because despite my best efforts, I'm still really struggling. My mind is not at rest. My heart is not at peace. I know there's something that I'm just not getting. And of course, lo and behold, the basic question of the non-Buddhist and the basic question of the Buddhist is what? The same, right? Totally the same. What the heck is going on here? What is going on? I've only got so many years. It's like the blink of an eye to be in human body, right? Not only is it a blink of an eye, but my God, it's a bit hellish around here, wouldn't you say? It's not easy to be alive. It's quite challenging. And I seem to be a lot of the times making it worse, not better. despite my best efforts. We can all relate, right? So the Buddha was like, I'm sure, like totally hearing the depths of that question. Of course, because it's all of our questions. It is the question, right? And the Buddha's response was just to sit still. Now, this is where the koan turns, right? When you are sitting there still in zazen, what is happening? Can you even name what's happening? As soon as you try to put a word on it or a label, something else is happening, is it not? Right? But yet something is happening. You don't know what it is. Do you? What's the next line? Mr. Jones. Thank you. Okay. So the Buddha was sitting and something's happening. But there was a recognition of this inexpressible, can't say what it is, truth that never fails, that from which the whole catastrophe is arising, having its life, and returning to. And we're practicing that truth that cannot be put into words, yet words can be used freely, right? This truth that I think for most of us in the beginning of our practice is kind of a shy bear. Got it, don't got it. I saw something, something just flashed. I think that would have been it, right? Of course, this goes on for a very, very long time. Still going on for me, actually. There's actually a koan about that, which is that there's a very small window. There's this huge bull with huge horns. And the bull manages to get through the small window. But its tiny little tail can't get through. Right? All hail the praise the little tail. So this non-Buddhist, something happened, Mr. Jones, right? Completely unexpressible, but yet totally liberating. Like you walk out of that Dokusan room laughing, right? Or you take a step and you just feel that warm-hearted chuckle in your being, right? I remember one time coming home from a session with Roshi, And he had finally cracked through like the first couple of questions of Moo, right? And we're 5 hours in the car, right? So he was feeling no pain, right? And of course, I had not yet. So I was feeling, whatever. And I swear to God, he was taunting me. He wasn't even trying to taunt me. But he was just like, he wasn't saying a word, but he was just like radiating it everywhere in the car, And I'm like, cut it out, stop it. I'm not there yet. And he's like, well, I'm not doing anything. It was really painful. Because, it was so palpable, right? And of course, that palpability, like as soon as you start walking to the Dokusan room, we know the degree of that palpability, right? And you do too. Sometimes you don't, but most of the times you do. Anyway, so let's see. The world-honored one, with his great compassion and mercy, has opened the clouds of my delusion and enabled me to enter the way. So he literally entered into the ground of being, right? He saw the ground of reality. He saw beyond birth and death, up and down. He saw that which we cannot speak of. He then made bows and took his leave. So you can only imagine, oh my God, this he doesn't even practice, and he had the kahunas to say that he was he had a Kensho experience? Who is this guy? Where does he come from? What the heck? Right? And that's definitely a painful part of practice, when, we all kind of know what time it is, and especially if you've been practicing for a long time, and, the people sitting next to you seem to be galloping ahead, and you can feel it, right? It's like, what the hell? Why aren't I getting it? This is horrible, right? But actually, this is beautiful, beautiful, beautiful practice. Because as soon as we just drop into, oh, what the hell? I'm not getting it, is not apart from it, right? And then you can have a nice little chuckle, a little tear comes down the eye, and you just keep practicing, right? So whatever is arising, the good, bad, the ugly, and the in-between, not separate from the great matter, not separate from the great way. And honestly, I'd say 99% of practice is settling into that fact. We just have to settle into it over and over and over again. Right? Not separate, not separate. So anyway, Ananda was one of those, what the heck? What is going on here, right? Now, Ananda, you have to it kind of fleshes it out a little bit if you know a little bit about him. It makes it even more interesting. So let's see. Ananda was born on the night that Buddha was awakened, enlightened, his big enlightenment experience, and he was the Buddha's cousin. Apparently, he was really quite hot, really handsome. Not only handsome, but super smart. And he's supposed to be the best hearer, which meant he could like hear all the teachings of the Buddha and memorize them and just bring them right back up at any time. So he had this kind of memory, right? He also was the person, the monk, that the women in the Sangha turned to when the Buddha wasn't letting the women study with him. And he basically said to the Buddha, I mean, don't you teach that, it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, that, either one can fully awaken? And the Buddha said, well, yeah. And then he said, well, if that's true, why can't the women practice? And the Buddha kind of like scratched his head and said, oh, maybe you got a point there, And he brought the women in, but they had like a few extra rules that were a little funky, but we won't go there right now. Let's see, what else can I tell you about Ananda? He studied with the Buddha for like 25 years. He actually did not come to awakening under the Buddha, which is really interesting. So that whole time, even to the end of his life, he was asking, what did that outsider realize when you praised him? Can you imagine? Oh, that's tough, right? But was it tough, right? Because, I'm pretty sure the Buddha could tell that Ananda was going to be an awesome teacher. And honestly, it takes as long as it takes. And I am prime example number one, right? I started practicing at 17. All right? I don't think I cracked through I don't even think I started to answer like my first checking question in Mu for like 10 years, maybe more. And interestingly, Aiken has a similar story. So he was studying on and off for like 12 years. And then he got serious for another 12. That's 24. And after 24 years, he was able to go on to case 2, Hakujo's fox, right? But no matter, because the Dharma's always doing its thing. It's always working on us. Sometimes we are working in the light of that experience, and sometimes we're working in the darkness of that experience. And it doesn't really matter in terms of practice whether it just doesn't matter, because it's always, Tilhar de Shardin, it's always headed towards everything coming into the one, right? All things return to the one. What does the one return to? Well, let's get all things return to the one first, right? That's the biggie. That's the harder one. All right. So there's Ananda. Oh, one last thing. So the Buddha dies, Ananda still is wondering, and he starts to study with Buddha's disciple Mahakayasapa. Remember, Mahakayasapa got the transmission after the Buddha was on Vulture Peak, and he said something, I have the marvelous, amazing, cool Dharma of everything, everywhere, totally like can't be surpassed. And I think, did he raise a flower? Yeah, he raised a flower. And he got the transmission. Does anybody remember Laughing? Yes. Remember that guy used to walk around with the sunflower? And he would just twirl the flower. That was Mahakayasapa. Anyway, you can go to YouTube and watch a clip about that. He was really quite famous. What was his name? Yeah. Henry or... I think so, yeah. Anyway. So Mahakayasapa got the transmission, and Ananda studied with Mahakayasapa, and there's a actual story of Ananda's transmission story, which goes something like this, which is so fascinating. Mahakayasapa says something to Ananda as they were getting ready. He was getting ready to give a talk, and Ananda says, "Yes, Master." And Mahakayasapa says, "Take down the flagpole." Now, take down the flagpole means the teisho is done, right? So those words, "Yes, sir." Ananda was, yeah, right there, sitting with the Buddha as the Buddha, right? There's another interesting story about him that when the Buddha died, he knew everything, but he wasn't part of the council to figure out what the heck to do next because he hadn't seen what the outsider had seen. And he was really bereft, and the people inside the council were bereft because, like, we don't actually remember what the Buddha said. But Ananda does, but he's not an arhat because he hasn't seen into emptiness yet. What are we going to do? So somebody said to him, "Dude, you got to get it together. You got to do this thing for the sake of the Dharma. Just go sit somewhere and figure it out." So apparently, he took it and said, "I better figure this out." The Buddhist temple of Toledo is depending upon me. And lo and behold, he sat through the night and had an experience, and his testing question is, you may enter the cave if you can pass through the keyhole on the door. And apparently he passed the test and was able to enter the conference, like, just in the nick of time. Anyway, if you can feel this is a koan, and this is also kind of an apocryphal story as well. Okay. So the Buddha at this time said to Ananda, he's like a fine horse who runs even at the shadow of the whip. So I like this response very much because, back in the days, I used to ride, and I do remember using that whip quite a bit. In fact, when we're carrying the fly whisk, I used to actually carry a fly whisk when I was younger, when we would ride in the woods, because that was the way that you got the flies off the horse. So it's basically like a big horse's tail. So you do this, fly on the back, and you'd whisk the fly away. So this fine horse who runs at the shadow of the whip, that's such a lovely image, isn't it? I mean, you really kind of get it. And I wanted to just read a little bit of where that came from, because it's kind of interesting. Oh no, it's okay. I did it right. Okay, so it comes actually from a sutra. Let's see, the Anguttara Nikaya. And here's the story. The one who learns that someone in another village is about to die and reflects on the transient nature of all life is like a horse who runs when it sees the shadow of a whip. The one who learns that someone in their own village is about to die and reflects on the transient nature of all life is like a horse who runs when it is whipped to the hair. The one who learns that someone in his family is about to die and reflects on the transient nature of all life is like a horse who runs when it is whipped to the flesh. And finally, the one who learns that they themselves are about to die reflects on the transient nature of all life and is like a horse who runs when it is whipped to the bone. Ooh. Right? So, everybody's bones have been walking around the zendo, sitting on the zafu and the zabuton. What kind of horse are you? I ask. But be careful, right? Of course, everybody wants to be the best horse, right? What about when things strike you so deeply that your own bones start shaking? Perhaps that actually is the best horse. What about this inexpressible reality that the non-Buddhist had affirmed through his encounter with the Buddha sitting still? Surely it penetrated deeper than the marrow of the bones. Okay, Mumon's verse. Walking along the edge of a sword, running along the ridge of an iceberg. No steps, no ladders, jumping from the cliff with hands open. This verse seems to be really kind of a praise of the capacity of the non-Buddhist, doesn't it? Walking along the edge of a sword. Make no mistake, we are walking along the edge of a sword. There are absolutely no guarantees of anything. And we are very well reminded to never forget that we're on the edge of a sword. You know, in a certain way, you could even say that delusion puts us to sleep, that we forget that we're on the edge of the sword. It's not boring on the edge of the sword, right? There's a lot of life on the edge of the sword. Running along the ridge of an iceberg. No steps, no ladders. No way down, no way off. We're running along the edge of the iceberg that's melting, 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 right? Jumping from the cliff with hands open. So this is the practice instruction, right? Jumping from the cliff of whatever box you think you have put yourself in. And if you have to think, oh, what is the box? The box is any kind of narrative story that you tell about who you are and what's going on. You know, it's very interesting. Like, you know, you definitely want to know, like, you want your doctor to know, like, what's going on in your body. You want your surgeon to know where all the things are in your body. And you want them to be very precise, right? When you're dealing with form is form, you actually want to be incredibly precise, right? If you're not precise, you do a lot of harm. But when we're investigating the great matter, this capacity for precise investigation of form is actually what keeps us from being able to take that leap with hands held high, because the box of perception and perception, I guess, and precision prevents us from trusting the inexpressible, right? How do you trust the inexpressible? Well, honestly, it's the easiest thing in the world. It's so easy. You're doing it every nanosecond, right? You have your life in the inexpressible. The words that I'm pouring out of my mouth are the words of the inexpressible. The words that vanish into the air are the inexpressible. Each one of you, radiantly beautiful, sitting on the cushion, is the inexpressible. And trust me, whatever you have in your mind is the inexpressible. So how to express that? This is interesting. This is very interesting. It can be felt, it can be expressed, it just can't be put in a box. Right? It was never, ever contained in the words of the Buddha that Ananda like memorized and had in his brain so perfectly. It was never there, only there in that box. Although it wasn't separate. But Ananda didn't get that piece of hands. Woo, we're jumping. Of course, you're jumping into where you are. Honestly, it's not that far of a jump. It's really kind of like, it's like, I guess you could call it a cliff. It's more like a little like anthill or something. Anyway. I thought we would end, and I'm going to do this sort of meta reading because I found it really interesting. So, in talking about trusting that jumping into the full catastrophe and the fullness of our human samsaric experience, which is, you know, a little dicey. There's a lot going on there. Blythe, who must have given this teaching to Aiken sometime when they were in the POW camp, in the midst of quite a degraded kind of life, right? You know, I don't know how big their cell was. I don't know how much food they got. I'm sure it was definitely not plush. So he remembers Blythe quoting Don Quixote, right? A vast lake of boiling pitch in which a great number of snakes, serpents, and crocodiles, and many ferocious and fearful creatures are wallowing about. A voice wails from the middle of the lake, "Whosoever thou art, O knight, who surveyest this horrible sea, if thou wishest to obtain the blessing that lies beneath these gloomy waters, show the might of thy valorous breast, and throw thyself into these black, burning waves. Dost thou not so? Thou art not worthy. If you don't do it, you're not worthy. To see the great wonders of the castles of the seven fairies that lie beneath these I knew I was going to stumble. Lugubrious. It's a good word. Lugubrious means sad, bereft. So the next time you're feeling sad, you could say to your friend, I'm feeling quite lugubrious today. Okay. Dost thou not do so? Thou art not worthy to see the great wonders of the castles of the seven fairies that lie beneath these lugubrious surges. No sooner had these awful words ceased than without a moment's consideration, without a thought of the danger, he runs, without even taking off his massive arms, commending himself to God and to his mistress. I think it's Dulcinea, if I'm remembering correctly. He dashes into the middle of the boiling lake. And just when he does not know what will happen to him, he finds himself among flowery fields, beautiful beyond Elysium. So that's a pretty good description of sitting on the cushion, is it not? All right, so we have just a few more minutes if anybody has any questions. When do the flowery fields come? Yes. Yeah, of course they're here. They're here in the question. They're here in the searching. He said, parting my way through grasses and weeds, I search for my true nature. Dear one, where is your true nature? Yeah. Just jump into that lugubrious surge. You don't even have to jump, you're already in it. We all have that niggling little reminder. None of us escape the reminder of like, what the heck is going on here? What is happening? Right? The ground is always shifting a little bit underneath our feet. And the sands are always sort of passing, shifting. And it takes half a second to be honest about that. No matter how gorgeous you are or how smart. Yeah, I think he was about to lose it long before that, but yeah. What does the non-separate look? It looks like you. It looks like this room. It looks like my words. You can't escape it. And it looks like nothing at all. Rise, my child. Take a half a step. Fantastic expression. Yeah. It's that easy. It's that clear. Right? We just doubt it. Yes. Well, have you ever ridden a horse with a whip? Oh, well, it's a good description, actually. Because literally, like horses, they can feel like, a little tiny fly who weighs nothing on like the tiniest tip of their hair. They feel that, right? So a horse has like, huge eyes and huge like senses of like, they're sort of flight animals. So they've got really like, they're ready. They're like deer, right? Deer and horses. So of course, if you raise that whip, they're going to know it. I mean, your own dog knows you're coming home like before you hit the driveway, right? Well, they're attentive to the half step. They're attentive to this. All right. We'll end there tonight.
Beings are numberless. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. We will be staying on schedule for extended Kinhin, but not walking in the woods because of a high wind warning. If you want to walk Kinhin outside, Jukai will be leading that. And if not, you may walk Kinhin inside with Soan. But please do engage in Kinhin if you're physically able. Thank you.